It's the open class with teacher Dan Hurst.
It was some sort of wrestling move. I don't really know what the deal was. But he is now in St. Luke's South in rehab there. So let's remember Bill. Put him on your prayer list and bring him before the Lord. Bill Crane and Wilton too. Okay. Jacob, where we last left off, has left his home and he is now headed to Haran. As you recall, Jacob his mother finally decided that he needed to get out of there because his brother Esau was going to kill him because he had deceived his brother and his father for that matter, although she had a part of that in both cases. But under the pretext of you've got to go find a wife, she sends him to Haran. And so he is on his way to Haran, presumably to find a wife. On the way to Haran, as we studied in our last time that we were together, he has some sort of encounter with God, as we studied in Genesis 28. It's actually in Genesis 27 and 28. And it wasn't a miraculous encounter. In fact, it was just a dream. But it was so significant that it began to implement a change in Jacob's life. Now, one of the most significant things that we saw happen in that encounter was how Jacob began to see and to think of God. Earlier in chapter 27, we saw how Jacob referred to God in Genesis 27 verse 20 when he came in to deceive his father, that time when he got his father to give him the blessing. And he says to him, this is what verse 20 says, Isaac asked his son, how did you find it so quickly? He's referring to the wild game that he asked Esau to go out and get. And so Jacob deceives him into thinking that he's Esau. And his dad says, how did you get the game so quickly, the wild game so quickly? And Jacob answers and he says, the Lord your God gave me success. Now, what he was saying and what we see in that is that Jacob believed in God. He knew about God, he believed in God, he showed some respect for God, but it wasn't a relationship that had a real impact on his life. He knew about God, he believed in God, but that relationship didn't really impact his life. Now, after this dream encounter, and God was so real to him and revealed himself and revealed some truth in his life, something changes. And one of the first things that we see is how Jacob refers to God. It's in Genesis 28, beginning with verse 20. Then Jacob made a vow, saying, if God will be with me and will watch over me on this journey I'm taking and will give me food to eat and clothes to wear so that I return safely to my father's house, then the Lord will be my God. And this stone that I've set up as a pillar will be God's house, and all that you give me, of all that you give me, I will give you a tenth. So Jacob now has this new, fresh appreciation for God. And he has a whole different approach and a whole different concept of God and of relationship with God. And it's a turning point that didn't completely change him immediately. In fact, it merely began the change in his life. I mean, really, if you want to nitpick what Jacob said or what he prayed here, it's pretty self-centered, pretty self-absorbed, pretty immature. And but that was where Jacob was. That was where his mindset was. Interestingly, that's where God met him, where his mindset was. God didn't say, well, you're going to have to grow up a little bit before you and I deal together. Or you're going to have to become a little more spiritual before, I do anything for you. No. God met him right where his mindset was, right where he was. And that's important for us to understand. God isn't asking you to get better before he starts working in your life. He's not saying you've got to become a better Christian before I start doing things in your life. Or you've got to become a better person before I start ministering in your life. God says, I'll meet you right where you are. But there's going to be a change. And the change starts at that point. And so then we go into this process of change. And we're all in a process of change in our lives. And we're all at different stages of change in our life. That's so important to understand. We are all in different stages of change in our lives. At different points in our spiritual journey. it would be foolish to assume that Jacob was now spiritually mature, a seasoned believer. I mean, he had just had this encounter with God, and it was just beginning. He had years to go before he could say that. And that pretty much can be said for us also. Now, something very interesting happens to Jacob here at the beginning of chapter 9, which is where we're going to study today. It's a valuable lesson to learn, especially for somebody like Jacob, who was so bent on having it all. Remember, he deceived his father into giving him the inheritance. He deceived his brother into giving up the inheritance. He deceived his father into giving him the family authority, the family blessing, giving him the authority over the family when the father died. So he has all of this stuff now, the inheritance, the family authority. It was really important to him to have all of this. And something really strikes his interest in this first part of chapter 29. And let's read chapter 29, Genesis, starting with verse 1. Then Jacob continued on his journey and came to the land of the eastern peoples, which is where his family area was. There he saw a well in the field, with 3 flocks of sheep lying near it, because the flocks were watered from that well. The stone over the mouth of the well was large. When all the flocks were gathered there, the shepherds would roll the stone away from the well's mouth and water the sheep. Then they would return the stone to its place over the mouth of the well. Jacob asked the shepherds, "My brothers, where are you from?" "We're from Haran," they said. He said to them, "Do you know Laban, Nahor's grandson?" "Yeah, we know him," they answered. Then Jacob asked them, "Is he well?" "Yes, he is," they said. And here comes his daughter Rachel with his sheep. "Look," he said, "the sun's still high. It's not time for the flocks to be gathered. Water the sheep. Take them back to the pasture." "We can't," they replied, "until all the flocks are gathered and the stone has been rolled away from the mouth of the well. Then we will water the sheep." And while he was still talking, then Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherdess. When Jacob saw Rachel, daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and Laban's sheep, he went over and rolled away the stone from the mouth of the well and watered his uncle's sheep. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and began to weep aloud. He had told Rachel that he was a relative of her father and a son of Rebekah. So she ran and told her father, and as soon as Laban heard the news about Jacob, his sister's son, he hurried to meet him. He embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his home. And there Jacob told him all these things. All right, where were we? Oh, okay. So there you have the passage there in your study guide. Now I want us to look at this very important principle about the well. The first thing that we discover is that the well is life. The well represents life. And there are some things that we need to understand about this principle. First of all, I want to give you a quick lesson in well etiquette. For those of you who plan on getting into shepherding, you need to know this well etiquette. Wells were often dug and made available to the community by the owner of the land. And some wells were next to towns and villages, and that was used for, those wells were used for drinking water and cooking and washing and that sort of thing. But some wells were away from town, and they were used to water herds, or sometimes they were used along roadways so that the travelers could have a place to stop and get water. Normally those wells that were out in the countryside were made available to the people in that area in exchange for protection. Or sometimes they would take profits from the herds when the herds were sold. But generally the way the whole thing worked was, if you're going to water your sheep at my well, then you have to agree to help protect my land. So if somebody comes in and tries to take my land, you will help defend the land. Or if there are wild animals, that sort of thing, you will try to keep the land safe and kill the wild animals, that sort of thing. So we'll kind of take care of each other, that sort of thing. That was the key principle for the exchange of the rights to the well. So there were, as these wells were developed through the whole area, these rules were kind of put in place, and they were just kind of understood. And there were these common rules that applied to these wells in the countryside. The first one was that if the owner of the well needed to use the well, that the owner had first access to the well during the day. In other words, that if the owner used that particular well for his herd, then he would have first access to the well. The others In other words, were not to use the well until the owner had finished using the well for the day. Generally, those wells had some sort of covering on them that would protect them primarily from blowing sand, sometimes from wild animals, so that they wouldn't foul the water. But the owner would, or they would have this, it wasn't a big opening, but they would cover it with a rock or some sort of covering and then put rocks over it to keep it covered so that primarily so that the blowing sand wouldn't get into it. And then the owner would come and bring his sheep, and either the owner or the hireling would remove the cover, and then the last person to use the well would cover it all back up. The shepherds who used that well, not the owner, but the other shepherds that would use the well, would arrive early, because generally the way it worked was you had access in the order that you arrived. So they would arrive as early as possible and get their sheep watered so they could move on and get their sheep off to a field to graze. They didn't really graze the sheep near the well because that whole area had already been grazed, and certainly the grass and stuff was all trampled down from all of the other sheep coming and using the well. Now, here in Genesis 29, it's the middle of the day, and Jacob questions the shepherds on what was going on, and he finds out that his uncle Laban's well, that it was his uncle Laban's well, which meant that he was almost at his destination. And very soon he discovers why they're waiting there until the middle of the day, which was very unusual, because you usually watered your sheep early in the day or at the end of the day. But here it was the middle of the day, and they were waiting to water their sheep. They find out, he finds out that the well owner's daughter is the shepherdess of the well owner's flock, meaning that the well owner apparently had no sons. Now he finds out that the well owner is Laban, his uncle, which meant that that it would be his cousin that would be bringing the sheep. Now he finds out that the cousin bringing the sheep is a woman. It's Rachel. And now it starts to make sense that it's the middle of the day. The delay in time was probably because, as a woman, she had a lot of work that she would have had to done in the morning before she could get the sheep to the well. She had to do cooking and washing and cleaning and watching Oprah and stuff like that. And so it would be about the middle of the day before she was able to bring the sheep to the well. So that's how Jacob meets Rachel, Laban's youngest daughter. He introduces himself to her. And the passage says, by the way, that he kisses her. It's just a reference to a formal greeting, although it is the first example in the Bible of kissing cousins. But it is just a very formal thing that happens there. So don't read anything extra into that. Now next week we're going to take a look at the very odd courtship of Jacob and Rachel. It's a really strange courtship. And we're going to take a look at that. But today I want us to focus on something that is really overlooked in this story. And that is the lessons from the well. Lessons from the well. The well is the source of provision and life. What lessons can we learn from the well? Now the well represents, as I mentioned, God's provision for your needs. The well represents God's provision for your needs. Now the obvious analogy here is to equate the water from the well with money. In other words, the well is like your source, your money, that sort of thing. Well, that is really too simplistic. It's far more comprehensive than that. The well represents the necessary provision for life. All of the necessary provisions for life. All that the well can meet. You have to have it. If you don't have enough of it, you suffer. If you have too much of it, you suffer. If you use it properly, it has tremendous benefits. If you use it improperly, it can devastate you. The shepherds would take the water and use it for their sheep. If they decided to take the water and keep it for themselves and not give it to their sheep, then they would eventually lose everything. But by learning the lessons of the well, from the well, they all benefited from it. So what are the lessons from the well? There are some things that I want you to see today that you can take and apply in your life from the well. The first thing that you need to understand is that you do not own the well. You do not own the well. The shepherds did not own the well. And because of that, there's some things that you should do differently, and different ways that you should act. First of all, you don't have any right to tell the well owner how to run his business. You can't go to, because it's not your well, you can't go to the well owner and say, hey, this idea about you getting first access and we got to wait for you all day, that's got to stop. As soon as we get here, we're going to start, diving into the well. No. It's not your well. You don't have the right to tell the well owner how to run his business. I love what Romans 11:33 through 36 says. Oh, the depth of the riches of the wisdom and knowledge of God, how unsearchable his judgments and his paths beyond tracing out. Who has known the mind of the Lord, or who has been his counselor? Who has ever given to God that he should repay him? For from him and through him and to him are all things, to whom be glory forever and ever. Amen. I love what that passage says. It's an acknowledgement that God is the well owner. And all things come from him and return to him. He is the boss. He is in charge. We don't own the well. The things that we need, the sources that we need, the resources that we need for life, the provisions that we need for life come from the well. And the well is owned by God himself. We don't own the well. And so the next step is the obvious follow-up to that it's not your job to tell the well owner how to run his business. It's also important to understand that arguing with the well owner doesn't make you smart or right, or smarter or righter. When you start arguing with the well owner, all you're doing is wasting precious oxygen. Shut up. You don't have the right to argue with the well owner. You don't have the right to tell the well owner how to run his business, and you don't have the right to start arguing with the well owner about what you need. And some of you have been doing that, haven't you? You've been arguing with the well owner about your needs. Romans 9:20 says it this way, but who are you, O man, to talk back to God? The isn't in there, but it should be. Who are you, O man, to talk back to God? Who are you to talk back to God? Shall what is formed say to him who formed it, why did you make me like this? Now here's how we do this. We don't really go and God say, well, God, why did you make me like this? What we say is, well, God, you made me like this. This is the way I am. You know I'm like this, so you made me like this, so it's your fault. Or here's the other thing we do. Well, God made me with a brain, so I think I'm supposed to use it. Well, yes, of course you are. But you're not to use it to try to outfox God, or to try to manipulate God, or to get God to do something that you want him to do that he doesn't want to do, which, by the way, you won't. So it's not your job to tell the well owner how to run his business, and arguing with the well owner doesn't make you smart or right. So it's important. The first rule from the well that we need to learn is that you do not own the well. Now, the second rule is that the well is not your purpose in life. Now, this is important to understand. You don't own the well, but it may be part of your calling to build the well. But it's not everybody's calling to build the well. The well was built for many, many people to use. God is the well owner. But sometimes it's your job to build the well. But it's not your purpose in life. The well is not your purpose in life. Far too many people have made the well their goal in life. And they say things like, boy, if I could just have a well, something that will continue to provide for me, something that will continually meet my wants and my needs, then I'll be happy. You ever say that? One way or another, you've probably said it. If I could just make this special investment, then I'll be wealthy and I'll be okay. Listen, in my business, I do a lot of voice work for all different kinds of companies all over the world. And there are a number of multi-level marketing companies that really specialize in trying to sucker people into buying into their product because it'll make you rich. Have you ever seen those? Don't you want to be wealthy? Now listen, I'm not opposed to being in business for yourself. I am. So I think it's I love the idea of being in business for myself, to be honest with you. But it's very important that when your motivation is to get wealthy, to be rich, you have the wrong focus. And you can spot them just like that. They've always got some guy standing in front of his Rolls Royce. And right behind him, he's on the dock, and there's the yacht, you know. Or off to the side, his mansion, you know. And I always think of those things. I wonder whose house they borrowed to do that. How much did it cost them to rent that car? You know, I'm always amazed at how everything is like, you want to be rich, don't you? You know, it's kind of that approach. And don't you want to, what if you had an extra $1,000 a week? Could you use it? What a dumb question. You know, and it's all so manipulative. The focus is all to create this idea that you need to have your own well. You need to have your own, you need to build your own well.